Nadeen, can you tell us about your introduction to abortion advocacy and what motivated you to get involved?
If you advocate for the rights of women, you're not um, dictating what those rights should be. So I think because of the work that I do, and because of the strong belief that I have that women's rights should be protected, it follows naturally that I would see women's bodily autonomy as critical to the full body of human rights.
How have you seen public perception of abortion change since you began your work in this field?
Well, now we can talk about abortion and have a conversation about it like this one, and I'm not afraid to put my face up on a screen somewhere, and all of us in here are having the conversation, and nobody's afraid to say, well, I believe that that women have a right to have an abortion. I remember when we started, or when I began to be familiar with this idea of women's right to safe and secure abortions. I wouldn't say it out aloud. You would have to wait until you went into a room, lock the room, and then a group of women would whisper together. So the fact that we can now have public conversations, that we can have a discussion about women's rights and put within it abortion, the right to access safe abortions. I think that tells how far we've come, that people are not afraid of the personal stigma, whether or not they've had an abortion. Because in the past, people, even though they supported women who had abortion, they wouldn't say it, or women who themselves would have had abortions would not have said a word to anybody. It was the best kept secret in town. So, and I see more and more women are saying, I have had an abortion, or I know someone who's had one. I support a woman who's had an abortion. I believe women should have the right to have an abortion. I hear more and more people saying that nowadays, and more people ready to engage you if they find out that this is your perspective. So I think we've come a far way in the last, let us even say the last 10 years. We've come a far way.
What are some of the misconceptions about abortion that you've encountered in your advocacy work?
I think the chief among them is this idea that if you are pro-choice, you're necessarily pro-abortion. People who are pro-choice are not necessarily pro-abortion. People who are pro-choice are pro a woman making up her mind. They believe that it's up to her. I think that's the central thing that people misunderstand about advocating for women's rights to an abortion. I think the other thing is that people feel as if we have laws that support access to safe abortions, legal abortions, then it means that every woman who gets pregnant is going to have an abortion. Perhaps most of the women who get pregnant will never want to have an abortion. And so this idea that, they believe that women are going to use abortion as what do you call it? Contraceptive. That women are just going to get pregnant as it, push a button, have an abortion. That's another misconception. I think the other thing is people believe that everybody in the church is anti-abortion, and that's not true. I remember in our last round of advocacy, there are a number of women from the church who came out and said we support, including the Catholic Church, who came out and said we support a woman's right to bodily autonomy and the need for safe legal abortion.
You mentioned that the church is often seen as a driving force of anti-abortion ideas in Jamaica. What do you think is the role of the church and religious ideology in shaping abortion policies in Jamaica?
Well, a lot of church people in Jamaica think that being anti-abortion is a good Christian thing to do. And they're not necessarily thinking about it outside of that, If you're a Christian, then you can't. Even if in their minds they think that there's something incongruent about that belief and their own personal conviction. So I think, and then it's not a discussion that churches have, They don't have it from a perspective of public health. They just have it from the perspective of the pulpit. And I'm not sure where in the Bible it's referenced, but a lot of people seem to think that it's referenced in the Bible. I've been trying to find somebody to show me where. Because I think that there's a way in which you can talk about biblical teachings as one set of Christian go-to principles, and you talk about church beliefs and church principles. And I think that in Jamaica, we haven't made that distinction. In lots of parts of the world, I'm talking about Jamaica, we haven't made the distinction between what Christians believe and where those set of beliefs come from. Not all of them come from the Bible. And Christian teachings are the teachings of the Bible. And some of the teachings of the Bible, some of them are not that bad around how we treat people, but the two sometimes don't coincide. Like, that it's the history of the church and its teaching that has led to that. But what makes me make that distinction is because I like to follow that up by asking people how women have been treated by Christianity and the Bible over time. And to also then say it's not incongruent that we would state the church and the Bible, if the Bible still held such a perspective, that it's not incongruent that both those institutions would see women as not deserving of this right.
You are one of the leaders of Mary Seacole Hall's I'm Glad I'm a Girl program. Can you share your role in that group and how important it is for younger generations to continue the work that older advocates have been doing?
So I'm Glad I'm a Girl is really about getting a next generation of young women who are about to make a mark on society. They're about to go out as any number of things, from nurses to pharmacists to x-ray, and that's not what they call them, whatever those technicians are, to engineers, to lawyers. And so if you look at where the trajectory of their lives 5-10 years down the line, these are the people who are going to be policymakers and who are going to be the gatekeepers. And so if what I'm Glad I'm a Girl is about is if we change their minds from now, or enough of their minds from now, before they go into those positions of authority and power, then some of the things that we want changed, by the time they get there, we would see some changes in them. So, and I also believe that as we progress through life, we have a responsibility to prepare the next generation. And it's an obligation that we have. So I work at UWI, I manage Mary Seacole Hall, but I also get this opportunity to engage young women in these conversations that could redound to my benefit when I am walking with a stick. Because perhaps if we get people who are more humane, who are more respectful of people's rights, then they won't discriminate the way they do against old people. So it's conscientizing. It's a feminist idea of conscientization, that we must get people to see people as people.
Reproductive justice takes a very communal kind of activism. Talk to me about some of the organizations and individuals that you've worked with within the abortion rights movement and how that has shaped your advocacy.
Only for people. I think perhaps I've worked with JFJ. I don't even remember. We Change, of course. A whole heap of groups. I don't remember all their names right. And individuals. A number of, when we had that coalition in, when was it? 2018, 2017. When we had that coalition, it was a whole heap of people. PNP Women's Movement, women from the JLP, so it cut across political divide. As I said, we had Catholic women, Sistering, Rock, a whole group of women, individuals as well, like Professor Tracy Robinson at UWI, who can help us to understand the legislative framework for abortion rights or in Jamaica and the Caribbean. People who gave us historical information on how the Ministry of Health in Jamaica has treated with the matter of abortion through time, and where we are now in contemporary Jamaica about how women get access to abortion. So many people participated in that movement and the conversations that were had. We had a number of conversations at Mary Seacole Hall with I'm Glad I'm a Girl and We Change as the leading entities, getting the groups together in one place. Because we started off with one meeting at JFJ, and then after that, with We Change and I'm Glad I'm a Girl working together, we facilitated a series of conversations at Mary Seacole Hall. Saturday morning soup, or just an afternoon of strategizing. Yes, we're going to be making a presentation before the committee. We had a whole heap of groups and individuals.
Recent political lobbying for abortion rights in Jamaica have been unsuccessful. Can you tell me what you believe the role of political lobbying is and your work in that so far in the abortion rights movement?
Okay, so I think on the matter of abortion, there is a lot of support in Parliament around women gaining access to abortion. I think what we saw in 2018, 2019 was Juliet Cuthbert Flynn stepping up in Parliament and talking about it as a situation that she saw happening in her constituency, West Rural, St. Andrew, and asking the Prime Minister to address the matter, right? And out of her lobbying, out of that presentation, I think it was the first time a politician got up and spoke about it from such a personal perspective and represented the voices of women who needed access to safe abortion. And so she made a plea for the matter to be addressed. And the Prime Minister at the time put the matter on the agenda of a standing committee of Parliament. Unfortunately, that committee was chaired by a Catholic who himself is, what was his post again? He's a deacon in the Catholic Church, one of those people who don't support abortion. So in a way, where it was placed for discussion tells you that it wasn't going to go anywhere. But if you understand how Parliament, at the time I didn't understand how Parliament worked enough to understand that the most that would come from this is a report. And so that what it means is if it fell off the order paper, if it fell off the agenda, it wouldn't go anywhere else. So it would need to be put back on the agenda another time. But that exercise taught us that there were a number of politicians who were coming out from the shadows, not just Cuthbert Flynn, but across the aisle. There were politicians who, when we made the presentations while we were in Parliament, would call us to say, yeah, they agree, and but how do you deal with the church, or when the backlash? They're afraid of the backlash, And so what it said to me is there are different levels at which we needed to work, There is working with the public to shift the ground, right? And there's not much of that needs to be done because the public is pro-abortion. Shifting the ground, I think. And then at another level, there's working with the politicians. But importantly, it's understanding the legal and constitutional framework, because we can't change it. None of the things that we did at the time could make a move on changing the abortion legislation. It's constitutional. It requires constitutional reform because our constitution saves that law. And so we are going to have to understand what that savings law clause means, and then think about how we create the change. And it might not be making noise in public, because all that is going to do is aggravate the church. Or we make sure that our lobby groups are more powerful than the church. Because the church doesn't necessarily go out there and cuss, It seeks meetings with the members of parliament and the ministers and the senators and the councillors. It's having conversations with a whole heap of people and getting them to feel as if my people won't vote for you. Yeah, so I think now that I look back, I was like, yeah, that wasn't going to go anywhere. But it did do something about getting your generation to be familiar with the conversation. Because before that, it had kind of gone dormant. So a new generation of young people learned what the narrative was around the advocacy for legal and safe abortion. And so that was the important thing about it, that we saw how the public was changing and how other people who have had abortion are willing to come forward and say, yeah, I had one. And so it's for the activists and the advocates to start changing the strategy, because the same strategy that was used up to 2019 can't be used again.
Nadeen, with that experience, how do you think we should tailor abortion advocacy strategies?
Well, I think first is for us to know what the strategies should be. It's not one. It's gonna be more than one because they have to target different groups of people. I think we should have relied more on the Ministry of Health and its policy, because it has a pro-abortion policy, and advocate with the Ministry of Health's desire in mind. Do it from a health perspective, because you have to see abortion rights as coming from two perspectives. There's a woman's rights perspective, and there's a public health perspective. And I think Jamaica is very resentful of the women's rights perspective. They will more likely shift their minds on the public health perspective. And I think that's where we need to go. We need to do more research, have more evidence of the impact of clandestine abortions, have more women who, with us protecting their identity, who speak from a first person perspective of the experience of the different ways that they have been able to access abortion in Jamaica. Because, in the last lobby efforts, the church pushed back at our claims that a lot of women are being impacted. But we didn't have the numbers. We didn't know how many women were being impacted. And we never had concrete evidence of what women were going through. Most women who were lobbying could go to their doctor and their doctor would help. They could pay for an abortion. Most of the women who were a part of the lobby efforts, and women who were now older women, who are not very conservative and would not share if they had an abortion, that experience. So we need a younger set of women who have had abortions, or women who have had clandestine abortions, who've been impacted in different ways. We need their stories. Not necessarily the university student either, who can afford to go to the doctor and pay the money, but the women who are struggling and are using every means necessary because they can't afford it. Because that's where the advocacy needs to be. To know as well that it's not a committee in Parliament will not shift it. So we're not going to engage Parliament that way. Engaging politicians means finding them in their offices and talking to them one-on-one, doing research for them, helping them to put forward positions, helping them to clarify questions that they have in their minds. It's going over to different political parties and spaces and offering our services to say, let us help to clarify where there might be misunderstanding. So it has to be more targeted with very specific intentions in mind.
Looking forward, how do we bridge the generation gap to ensure that the work continues?
is that there should be a constant set of teachings on the issue. Like what we keep doing is we keep waiting for a moment and then everybody jump on the moment. It should be on the agenda. Every year you should have a moment in Jamaican history where women, and that's something that perhaps we should work at doing, where we have a specific time, marking a specific moment around women's reproductive rights, where we have conversations and have some kind of action around the matter. But as it is now, we haven't really done anything since that last time, and there shouldn't be a waning. So we have big action dies down, 10, 20 years, take it up again. There needs to be consistent effort and building of the momentum from our end as women, not necessarily from the end of the politicians.
You mentioned that the 2018-2019 reform efforts were unsuccessful and maybe misguided. What are our immediate next steps in 2024?
We have a constitutional reform effort going on now. It's to really look at what about the Constitution makes it impossible to change the law or the abortion laws, and to start taking an interest in constitutional reform and start thinking about what the argument is going to be as we proceed along the path to constitutional reform. Start getting groups active and ready to go before the Constitutional Reform Committee. Start building the ground so that women and those who support women having an abortion will understand what their perspective ought to be from the perspective of constitutional reform.